How's it going, old son?
Alright, cheers.
What noisy bleeper thing are you playing now?
Sorry, what was that?
I asked what game you were playing in an old man fashion. Is this the Blade Runner music? So is this a flight simulator type game? That looks silly. Hey, what's up, Grim?
Hey Jack. Not a lot.
Can you hear me?
Cool, cool.
Yeah, I hear you.
Wasn't sure whether I was muted or not. It's a bit hard to tell with this headset.
I am a big fan of your channel. Your rewriting advice is really helpful.
Cool. Well, while you've got me, do you want to ask anything?
I picked up the Mars trilogy after watching your video about burrows.
Cool. Don't remember what I said now.
What are your thoughts on the parallels between Barzoom and Gore?
I mean, they're both within the genre of planetary romance. Obviously, that's the main point of comparison. Both of them were controversial in their time. Because I mean, at the time the Barsoom books were first being written, the very idea of people being naked was titillating enough. I think Gore is a lot less titillating than people think. It's not as explicit as people tend to think, which is interesting. I think a lot of it is a lot more implied, and I think Barsoom is similar in that way. It's a shame we never get an accurate representation of Barsoom, because it's, yeah, if you take it literally, it's full frontal nudity all day, every day. But it's interesting how some of the older illustrations do depict that. And how there were even some Tijuana Bibles based on the Barsoom books. They're a bit hard to find, obviously. I mean, basically they're the same genre. Apocryphally, Norman was supposedly inspired by how bad a lot of pulp sci-fi was. I thought, if anyone can do it, you know, I can do it. I think one thing that's really different is, rather than a similarity, is that Barsoom, the creatures are all different subspecies of men. You have black Martians, red Martians, white Martians, and so on. For the most part, the Tharks are different, and the plant men and a few other bits and pieces are different, but largely they're all subdivisions. Whereas on Gore it's more cultural than anything else. The idea of the transplanted cultures from Earth's past is really interesting. That doesn't come through so much as something in Barsoom, which is a fallen world from a higher technology level and so on. Whereas Gore has been deliberately kept at a more primitive level in some regards by the priest kings and so on. So both the differences and the similarities are interesting. Yeah, it's all sword and planet, just with a bit of bondage in one case, and weirdly less nudity in Gore.
What are your favorite aspects of Barzoom? I am really interested in the different races of Martians.
I like the black Martians, the pirates. Though of course you don't get to learn that much about them before John Carter sort of overthrows the whole thing. Yeah, raiders and cannibals. Yeah, but pirates at the same time. It's called air pirates because it's Barsoom. Just the only problem with Boris is you don't really get the detail of how or why things have ended up as they are. Whereas you kind of get more of a sense of world building rather than just pure adventure from Norman's work. So, I mean, it's hugely imaginative, but leaves you speculating. That can be good in some ways because it engages your own imagination. But it would be nice to have some more sort of definitive answers, really. Be right back a sec.
Do you read Marvel Comics? It seems like they took tremendous inspiration from Burroughs for the Skrulls and the Atlanteans.
Extreme toxicity detected.
Sorry about that, back now. Do I read Marvel comics? Seems like they took inspiration from Burroughs for the Skrulls and the Atlanteans. I don't read them much anymore. I used to. I guess I can see that. The inspiration, sorry, that's the cat attacking the microphone. Stop it.
Extreme water toxicity detected. Extreme toxicity detected.
I mean, they used to do Tarzan comics. I think did they do Barsim comics? Stop attacking it, you little goblin. Did they do Barsim comics? I don't remember. But they've done some stuff based on Burroughs' work, so it wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, I have a couple Barzoom comics.
I know they did some of the pulps, like, sorry about the noise, it's the cat still.
Dynamite published some.
That's some newer stuff, isn't it? They did some Flash Gordon and other stuff as well. Vampirella, was that Dynamite, I think? Yeah, I'm not sure I like all their redesigns and so on, but... I did really like the John Carter film, despite, you know, differences from the books. It's a shame the marketing and so on was rubbish. They didn't know what they were doing with it, really. Jareth, leave it alone.
I liked the John Carter film too, it was ahead of its time.
Yeah. And just so terribly, terribly marketed. Jareth, stop it.
It would make a great Amazon series.
Yeah, yeah. It'd probably be a better way to do it, would be a series, but the themes and so on, I think it would have to be even more sanitized for today's market, and that's... what's the point of doing it then, really?
Units received. Units received.
I mean, even in John Carter, they carefully avoided a lot of the stuff. I think when you recreate something, you need to respect the original material. And I worry that people just don't do that anymore.
Units received. received. Units received.
I am with you on the problem of censorship.
You lose the content so much,
Received.
and you do that. Reinterpretation's great, but it's... but so often you lose the essence of the thing.
I think 10 years from now things will be reversed. Censorship is cyclical.
I'd like to think so, but the hyper PC moment we had in the 90s didn't last this long. This has been going on for a
We
long
kind
time.
of repeating the 50s.
Yeah, but it's coming from the other political wing. So it's not exactly the same, though. Yeah, very familiar to anyone who lived through Jack Thompson or the Vampire Panic or the Satanic Panic. Same shit, different rhetoric.
How do you think the left can become less puritanical?
I honestly do not know. It should never have gotten like this in the first place. And it's hard to understand how it got to this stage, and it's self-defeating. Because people are forgetting how to argue their side. And the whole thing is it's just so antithetical to left-wing politics. You know, how did we win all our advances for civil rights? It was by making the argument, you know, and making the more compelling and factual argument. And it's like people have forgotten how to do that. They're just constantly trying to silence others and shut them down. That's just counterproductive, because you annoy people with the constant accusations. You don't back them up because there's often no substance to the arguments being made. And you forget how to argue. Because you don't feel that you have to defend your ideas or relitigate whatever argument it might be. But that's a mistake. I think that's why so much ground has been lost and why the right has been so ascendant up to this point. Because they will talk to people. They will have the argument in a way that the modern pseudo-left just doesn't even want to. Yeah, it's a huge self-defeating mistake, and they're incapable of self-correction at this point, which is also frustrating.
I totally agree. I think Trump and Brexit inspired a huge backlash from the left, and reacting to those problems became more important than th.
Well, I think those things, yeah, Brexit and Trump were a reaction to problems that were already present. Overreach isn't quite the right word, but I mean, you know what I mean if I say overreach. So, yeah, Trump was a reaction, Brexit was a reaction. Understandable, but ultimately self-harming reactions. The thing with Trump especially, Brexit as well, really, he might be a con man and a bullshit artist, but he made the effort to bullshit people, you know, and to make the argument, yeah, like I was saying before. He put the blame on things like outsourcing and various other less savoury things to blame America's woes on. But, you know, he was making an argument, and he was the only one making an argument, and the opposition weren't countering his argument, they were just calling people racist. You know, to be fair, quite a lot of them were, or are, but a lot of them also weren't. They just happen to have much more parochial and material concerns. You know, like our town's a ghost town because all the work's gone elsewhere, or you know, the mine is shutting down. You know, they're not so concerned by what seem to be esoteric concerns like climate change or whatever else. You know, they are way lower on Maslow's hierarchy of needs in where their concerns are. And if you just abuse people, they're not going to listen. Yeah, and there's no effort to educate, which tends to come across in a patronising way because people have abused the term. But you know, to lead, to show people why you're doing the things that you're doing, rather than just dismissing anyone who disagrees with you as a bigot. And Brexit, similarly, Europe has been a convenient whipping boy for stupid things that various governments in the UK have done. It's been easy to blame the EU for it, and no real effort was made to extol the virtues of the EU or membership. You know, we're all about to get a crash course on just what a stupid idea it was to leave imminently. But the right wing, the xenophobes, the bigots, they were the ones making the argument. Can't get a job? Why? I saw those Romanians and Poles and whatever else coming in. It's not true, but they were making the argument, and no one was making the counter-argument. There's other issues as well, like the right-wing, hugely right-wing slant of the media in the UK, but you can't be that surprised when you lose an argument if you're not actually making an argument. It's just frustrating. I mean, I lose my temper with people, but I try not to. Yeah, and some people genuinely are bigots and racists and all the rest of it, but not everybody.
What do you think will be the economic ramifications of Brexit?
Well, it's Brexit on top of COVID. Either one would be a catastrophe, so this is going to be a total disaster. Food prices are going to go up. Shipping is going to be a lot more difficult. Probably shortages, but we'll see. Kent is going to be a lorry park. I mean, even before we've properly left, there's been problems getting certain things like medicines and so on. The medications I take have been a bit flaky because of all this. Yeah, it's just a total crapper. A handful of people are going to get very wealthy off it, though. I'm worried that the wrong people, i.e. Europe, are going to get blamed for the problems again, though. Somehow. Nationalism's not a particularly rational point of view. But yeah, it's going to be an unmitigated disaster. I mean, just look at the fishing issue, right? Fishing is less than 0.1% of the UK economy, and yet it's the big talking point, and it's the hang-up in the negotiations and all the rest of it. Meanwhile, I think it's 80% of the UK economy is services, and it's the service sector that's going to be hit hardest of all. So we're sacrificing 80% for 0.1%. It's just ludicrous. it's kind of bitterly funny seeing all these people suddenly realising that, what, I can only spend 3 months out of the year in my European second home? That's outrageous. That's what you voted for. I need a visa to go to France. Yeah, that's what you voted for. It's hard not to be really bitter and resentful. Glowing crystalline life forms. Interesting.
Do you think the US will eventually split up as a result of the same political separatist tendencies that inspired Brexit?
I don't know. It's hard at the moment to see how it's reconcilable, but they did go through a civil war and managed to kind of patch things up after that in the past. Either this will continue to get worse, or it'll pull back from the brink, and I couldn't make a call on that, which is going to be which. If I had a preference, it would be that things get so out of hand that most reasonable people pull back towards the centre, though the American centre is off to the right. But I suspect the sort of rump of the Trumpian Republican Party will just continue to double down on conspiracy theories and nonsense. The only saving grace is that he's old and unfit and will probably die soon. So that might take the wind out of their sails a bit.
Speaking of the American Civil War, do you see a Southern Confederate allegory in the story of John Carter?
Well, he was a Confederate cavalryman, wasn't he, if I'm remembering correctly? I think there are definite parallels between the sort of lost cause of the Confederacy and an honourable man caught up in something not particularly honourable, and then, you know, preserving Mars, keeping Barsoom going. You know, that's a doomed enterprise as well, because the planet is just dying and there's nothing to be done about it. So there's definitely a theme of futility in all of that. It's interesting to compare the way that Barsoom treats Native Americans and the way Gore treats Native Americans, and people's reaction to that.
How does Gore treat Native Americans?
Okay, so if we start with Barsoom, when he first travels to Mars, it's in the cave. it's gas, isn't it? That kind of knocks him out and sets him astrally travelling. But he's hiding from a warband of Native Americans in that. And that's quite a sort of stereotypical approach. But then he wakes up on Mars, and the first thing he sees pretty much is a naked red woman. So I think that's a literary device to call into question whether he's hallucinating or not. But while he's on Earth, people with red skin are treated as savage or inferior. It's just it's the viewpoint of the time, It's a historical artifact. And yet on Mars, which I find interesting and kind of goes against that, the Red Martians are the most civilized, well, some of them, Helium at least, is the most civilized and advanced society that remains on Barsoom. Right, so there's a lot of contradiction there, and yet I haven't seen the same kind of controversy or reaction to Burroughs' approach to Native Americans as I have to the Gurian approach to Native Americans. So John Norman, he refers to the Native American transplanted cultures as red savages because that's the way the other Gurians see them, and they're really fiercely protective of their home. Apart from the name, it's an incredibly empathetic and sympathetic treatment. And the reason they fight off any settlers in their area is because of what happened to them on Earth. It's not entirely clear when they were transplanted. But you can see all that in the background if you read into it. But he treats the Native American society incredibly respectfully. He just calls them red savages, and that's all most people who look at the books tend to react to. So in the some of the reaction to the Gurian RPG that I wrote, that seems to be triggering for people to see Native Americans referred to as red savages, and they try to hold me to task, and they try to hold Norman to task for that. But what he's doing is describing how the main Gurian civilizations regard them, because they're so vicious, and savage isn't necessarily an insult. But they don't bother to actually look into how it's treated. They just react to the name without thinking about it. Whereas Burroughs' approach, it would be a lot easier to characterize that as racist, even though it is more nuanced than that. But it doesn't seem to be the same reaction, for whatever reason. That was a bit rambly, but hopefully it made the point.
I agree, savage is an interesting term to deconstruct.
Yeah, and I mean, these days, slang, savage, is a positive thing. Like so many slang terms, you turn the negative into a positive. But I mean, in Korean culture, they would be respected for their martial prowess and
A
so
lot
on.
of rappers refer to themselves as savages, like 2-1 Savage.
Exactly. And a lot of fitness fanatics use the term for someone who's really putting the effort in.
Another video you made that I really liked was the one about Quentin Tarantino.
You're going to embarrass me because I often don't remember what I've said. That was probably about his love of trash cinema, and his respect for
How
the
do you
tropes and
feel
so on.
about postmodernism? I know that's a broad question.
Oh, yeah, and it's a difficult one because a lot of the people who criticise postmodernism are getting it a bit wrong. And yet it is at the heart of a lot of the problems we're having.
Technology recharge.
I prefer modernism. I like the values of truth-seeking through science, objectivity. I tend to think that you can only make the correct action if you're properly informed. The original idea behind certain aspects of postmodernism, that you should really vociferously try and tear things down as a way of understanding them, breaking them down, trying to see if they sort of survive that deconstruction and examination, that's good. But the total loss of meaning and the derision for even trying to be objective, despite the enormous benefits it's brought humanity, I can't get on board with that. Ultimately, I think its embrace of subjectivity and its erosion and corrosive effect on truth-seeking render it useless. Even if you can't be perfectly objective, that doesn't mean you shouldn't strive for it, or that we collectively, as a sort of group effort from many perspectives, can't be objective in the aggregate.
Do you like the way that postmodernism redeems and reuses trash culture?
I don't know that I would agree that it does. Because a lot of this critical theory really attacks trash culture by reinterpreting it through a subjective lens, which bears little or no relation to what any of the stuff is actually about. I mean, particularly if you go for a Marxist lens or a feminist lens or a critical race theory lens, kind of destroys your ability to appreciate trash culture for what it is.
There is a lot of different approaches to postmodernism.
Yeah, that's part of what makes it difficult, but I mean, if we limit ourselves to the sort of current mode of it, I think there's a huge amount of issues with it. The foundations aren't a great deal better, but at least they had a clearer viewpoint.
The deconstruction of high culture, I think, has potential for seeing the gold in trash culture. A kind of alchemy.
Perhaps, but that doesn't seem to be the way it's practiced. I mean, where it goes horribly wrong is in its criticisms of, rationality, objectivity, the Enlightenment. its romanticism, and rejection of truth. I mean, these are things that ironically led to some of the grand narratives of the Second World War, whether it be racial purity or nostalgia for the past, or the total erasure of truth that we saw coming out of Goebbels. So ironically, while sort of trying to deconstruct and critique grand narratives like Manifest Destiny or liberation ideology, or even the idea of progress, it led to atrocities, really, in its early forms, and grand narratives of their own, which, because they rejected rationality, could not be, skeptically attacked using rationality. You can't reason someone out of an argument they didn't reason themselves into, as the saying goes.
That makes sense, since the popular postmodern philosophers were influenced by Heidegger, who was a Nazi.
Yeah. It's weird that there's so many Marxists who are postmodernists as well, because Marxism has a grand narrative, and it's a liberation ideology, at least as written. And yet that's something that postmodernism is against. So I mean, moral relativism makes sense, but epistemological relativism doesn't. And my main problem, I would say, with postmodernism and the things that come out of it.
They find really convoluted ways of explaining being postmodern Marxists.
Yeah. But the main issue I have with it is this embrace of subjectivity and rejection of even an attempt at objectivity, and the way it has corrosively undermined scholarship and science by embracing that subjectivity. It's a form of philosophical pareidolia, I think. If you go looking for something and willfully interpret everything you see to try and fit that, of course you're going to find it.
I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole, but both Foucault and Deleuze attempted to deconstruct subjectivity in postmodern texts in T.
Deconstructing their own deconstruction.
That's what I mean by multiple postmodernisms, though.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, I think pretty much all philosophy has been useless since natural philosophy became science. And the idea of postmodernism just feels absurd on its face in the first place.
You rewrite that postmodernism has led to embracing subjectivity.
Yeah, which is no way to get to the truth. Right? It's like that Isaac Asimov story about Death of the Author. Supposedly, he went and sat in on a lecture that was studying one of his books, and thought what the professor said was very interesting, but completely at odds with what he actually meant in the book. So at the end of the class, he supposedly goes up to the professor and says, "I thought it was very interesting, but it's all wrong. That's not what I meant at all." The professor says, "Well, what makes you think you know what the book is about just because you wrote it?" It kind of says it all, I think.
LOL.
I mean, sure, you might receive what someone's created in a different way than was intended, but that doesn't mean that your interpretation is correct. The only person
Authorial intent definitely matters.
Yeah. If you misinterpret what someone's written as racist or whatever, and that's absolutely not their intent or even opposite to their intent, you don't get to trump their intent with your own subjective interpretation. After all, they objectively know what it was they were trying to do. They might have failed, that's always possible, but...
I think there is power in the text itself also.
Yeah, but this is where that pareidolia problem comes in. Because if you go looking for racism or sexism or whatever, you're going to find it, you know?
Lovecraft's texts can be read as anti-racist.
He was a racist. Later in life, less so. He married a Jew, for example, which people tend to miss out when they characterise him. But his work may simply not have been as good if he wasn't xenophobic and so on, because it's that fear of the other, fear of the outside, fear of the alien that drives so much of his work. So if he hadn't been a bigot, at least early in his career, would it have been as good? Probably not. Ironically, the bits of Lovecraft Country that worked quite well.
The concept of the other is in some ways glorified just as much as it is demonized in his stories.
Yeah, it varies from story to story. I was saying that the parts of Lovecraft Country that actually worked were just mirror image racism. The othering of white people and men and so on was just an inversion of Lovecraft's unease around women, unease around sex, and everything else. So it's not progressive to reverse the arrow of prejudice.
Did you like the show overall? I gave up halfway through.
It was very hit and miss for me. There were aspects of it I liked. Others I didn't. Some episodes were stronger than others. It couldn't seem to decide whether it wanted to be like an anthology show of different stories or one overarching story, and I think it was weaker for it. And it suffered from its own hype. I think it didn't live up to the hype.
There was too much plot armor around the main characters for me.
Yeah.
The fun of Lovecraft-esque stories is you don't know who is gonna die. No one's safe in Lovecraft stories.
True. Especially not the supposed author, certainly. I think
Do you watch The Mandalorian?
I've watched some of the first season, but I'm waiting to watch it with my partner, so... I think Lovecraft Country would have worked better as an anthology, so I know it was based on a book, but I think it would have worked better as an anthology with different characters in each episode, rather than as one story, because they just didn't hang together too well.
I totally agree. The best episodes were one-shots.
Like the ghost story in the house, as its own episode, unconnected to anything else, would have been better, I think.
Is there hope for the future of Vampire the Masquerade?
Hard for me to tell. The presentation of the new one I didn't like at all. There's aspects of the system I don't like combining all the damage and so on together in one. I haven't liked that since New Wad. I think the New World of Darkness put so many people off, it's hard to recover from. And then there seems to be tension between different aspects of the new owners and others. Like, do you want to make an interesting, edgy, horrific game, or do you want to be constantly apologizing to people for being an interesting, daring, edgy game? I think they got a lot of problems. I don't even know what's going on with them at the moment. That's how unclued up I am on the current state of Vampire, which is a shame because I used to love it. Played it the day it came out in the UK, joined the LARP Society for many years, used to run the London game of the official LARP Society. I just can't get excited about it anymore. Once bitten, twice shy, I guess.
I've been running Starfinder, liked your review of that game. Any thoughts on Paizo?
Similar issues with Paizo, I think, really. They're caught up in trying to be performatively right on, which makes them very reactive and makes them less effective at creating good games and believing in their vision. I mean, they were ahead of D&D until 5th edition came out, but I don't know if they're a viable ongoing proposition. I like Starfinder. I don't like the setting for it, but I like the game as a whole. And really need to get around to running something for that, come to think of it. But I don't think Paizo's future looks as rosy as it used to at all. They really need a success of their own, something different. When their MMO fell through, that was bad news. Their reach exceeded their grasp, I think.
What are your problems with the setting? I've been tweaking it for my campaign.
I just don't like mixing fantasy and science fiction. It's a personal taste thing. It's why I can't stand Shadowrun. It's like, pick a lane.
What about Star Wars and Warhammer?
Star Wars is okay because I think that's your expectation, and it's got its own fantasy tropes, so it's more sci-fantasy. Whereas Starfinder just sort of winds on Galarian. Warhammer 40k is so heavily derived from UK comics and so on that I have less of an issue with it. And I think it's also heavily influenced by things like Dune, the kind of techno-primitivism. So I think that's less of an issue. Catholic space Nazis, you know, that stuff makes sense and fits.
Which UK comics is Warhammer influenced by?
2000 AD, I mean, it's pretty much the only UK comic that there has been. It's more obvious in the earlier editions of 40k, but they're heavily inspired by Judge Dredd and Nemesis the Warlock in particular. Michael Moorcock as well, obviously, but that's outside comics.
Gonna check out Nemesis the Warlock in 2000 AD, thanks.
You won't regret it, especially Nemesis. Crosses over with ABC Warriors a bit, so you might want to look that up as well. Warhammer Fantasy is more of its own beast, but again, there's the Moorcockian influence there.
Technology recharge.
Whoa, a Nemesis looks awesome.
Yes, really good. Especially the earlier stuff where the art was done by Continental artists or Kev O'Neill. The humans are the baddies in Nemesis, and the relation between the termites and the Terminators in Nemesis, the relation between those and like Space Marines and the culture of the Imperium is pretty obvious. Massively xenophobic, pseudo-religious.
Do you think Warhammer will be tame now that Marvel Disney owns it? I got the latest comic.
Cool. 2000 AD is not as good as it used to be, but yeah, there's still some shiny bits in it.
Weather warning. Incoming storm.
Are you familiar with accelerationism?
Yes. And I think it's kinda dumb. I'm more of a fan of Fabian-esque gradualist change.
Technology recharge. Technology recharge. Technology recharge.
I agree it has gotten really popular among cyberpunk fans though.
Technology recharge. Technology recharge.
It's just if you look back at history, you know, revolutionary upheaval change always tends to go badly. However good the intentions of the people involved.
Are you opposed to an anarchist revolution?
Philosophically, I am an anarchist, but that's philosophically. Pragmatism overrides that for me. I think it has to develop slowly, naturally over time. I don't think a full-on anarchistic society is possible without post-scarcity, and we're nowhere near post-scarcity yet. For me, ideology is more of a compass point than an overriding meaning to life.
That is a lot more rational than the anarchism I am used to.
Well, I see it as being the goal is the maximum amount of possible freedom for the maximum number of people. So in the current state of affairs that we live in, I think that's most easily achievable via socialism, non-Marxist socialism. And that also advances us towards post-scarcity, so it seems like the most pragmatic solution. And you shouldn't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. You know, if we can materially better people's circumstances, if we can make it so that people don't have to fight each other so hard for resources, then that seems like a big step along the way to me.
That makes sense. Things look too dark these days to have hope for a revolution.
And revolutions tend to be counterproductive. I mean, look what happened to the French Revolution. Look at what happened to the Communist Revolution. They're just too vulnerable to takeovers. The irony is that the Marxists, who called their version of socialism scientific socialism, failed so utterly, and the utopian socialists, which was what they were called by the Marxists, it's their version of socialism that's been massively globally successful.
Marx got a lot right, but he was living in a fantasy world.
His analysis is largely sound, but it is stuck in the 19th century. It doesn't describe the world as
He
it
thought he
exists
could
now.
fix everything by writing a few books.
Yeah, the analysis isn't entirely useless, but it's outdated and outmoded. I'll never understand people who treat ideologies like religion, or people who are religious, to be quite frank.
Weather warning. Incoming storm.
Our technology has made the labor theory of value nonsensical.
Well, there's still labour, it's just not the same kind that he envisioned. Big problem that we have is that productivity has risen enormously in no small part because of this technology, but the recompense that you get for that work, for that increased productivity, doesn't exist. It hasn't risen at anything like the same rate. And people are so politically illiterate, that doesn't help matters either. Yeah, I'm just bitter and old.
Are you familiar with Mark Fisher?
Rings a bell, but I'm terrible with names. The blogger who died in a couple of years ago? Is that the guy you mean?
Yes.
Is he the capitalist realism guy?
Yet a capitalist realism, what do you think of the concept?
I haven't really looked into it that much. I do follow Zero Books, but I find it incredibly frustrating. So utterly wedded to Marxism. It's Doug Lane, I think, isn't it? Yeah. Occasionally trade barbs with him on Facebook. I see Marxism like the internal combustion engine. It's hideously inefficient, and it takes all this other gubbins, widgets, and doobies tacked on top of it
Fisher
to keep
is the
it going.
origin of the problems with Zero Books.
Oh, right. I mean, they've published some good stuff. some of the pro-free speech, so Jerry Barnett's book, Porn Panic, is good. But there's also some absolute tripe like Kill All Normies, which is awful and just ignorant. But yeah, I haven't read up on it enough because I've been kind of put off Zero books quite a lot. If you reckon it's worth it, maybe I'll have another go.
Kill All Normies is such bullshit.
There's nuggets, there's flashes of understanding in it, but it just doesn't understand the very cultures and societies, subcultures and sub-societies that it's trying to critique and talk about. It's just it reads like an anthropology novel from someone who never actually left their house. But yeah, Porn Panic is good. Their YouTube channel, Zero Books YouTube channel, is occasionally interesting, but so where I was going with the analogy about the internal combustion engine is you got all this other stuff bolted on to make it efficient and to make it clean.
I think your videos about depression are great.
Just need to get a shot of it. Well, thanks. I hope it helps people. I think it is helpful to be open about that sort of thing.
Extreme night temperature detected.
That's what I hope, at least.
And I think Zero Books makes people more depressed.
Maybe. Seem to make Fisher depressed, at least. I'm gonna finish exploring the system and then I'm gonna get some sleep.
Capitalist realism is all about blaming our depression on capitalism. And believing it can't get better until we have a revolution.
I think it can. We've got examples like the Scandinavian countries, for example. They temper their capitalism with strong local government, communitarianism, voluntarism, and a strong socialist welfare state. So it's certainly possible to do capitalism better. I think it's mostly just the Anglo nations that get it really wrong. Yeah, mainland Europe does it quite well, but it's England and the United States, Australia to a lesser extent, New Zealand to an even lesser extent. It's those countries that are doing it wrong, for want of a better phrase. Because private enterprise is good at some things, but not everything, and collectivized effort, whether it be through government or otherwise, is better at other things. Yeah, not everything has to be for profit. There are other measures of value than monetary, put it that way. Though I think there are fiscal arguments for most left-wing ideas.
I definitely agree with that.
It's like healthcare in the United States. Yeah, socialized healthcare is the fiscally conservative position because you get a more effective healthcare system for less money. And yet hardly anyone ever seems to make that argument. I guess because they feel on the left that that's conceding ground to the right if they argue on their terms, but if that's what it takes to win the argument, and it's true, which it is, then why not? So one of my worries about Brexit is that it'll be used as an excuse to do all the wrong things, like gutting the NHS and so on. Oh, the economy's ruined, we can't afford these things anymore. Yeah, okay, but you ruined the economy, and it's still cheaper if we maintain these social services, so... wrong.
I think Zero Books is trying to make money off of Marxism, and it is the perfect con because capitalism isn't going anywhere.
Perhaps. For all that their YouTube channel is just obsessed with Marxism, they do publish other stuff though. I guess that's valuable.
Technology recharge. Technology recharge.
I appreciate the political videos you put out because they readjust your opinion, you don't sell your politics.
I mean, I probably should, but but yeah, that's how I try to do it. I just think that more important than selling my politics is to just be accurate about what these things mean, the history of them and so on. It's like the hill I've chosen to die on is educating Americans about what socialism actually means and is. It's an impossible Sisyphean task, but I refuse to give up.
LOL.
Toxic protection falling.
The argument usually goes something like this. They'll post something stupid about socialism, not understanding what socialism is, mistaking it for Marxism and communism. I correct them. They probably say something about Venezuela. I say something about Scandinavia. They claim that the Scandinavian countries aren't socialists. Then I ask them what their objection really is to socialised healthcare, ending homelessness, having an effective social safety net and so on. At which point they say, but that's socialism. And then I post some sort of shrug emoji. So those things are socialists, but the countries that enact them aren't socialists. Who Okay. Whatever you say.
LOL story of my life. Do you think people like Corbyn and Sanders have a shot in the future?
Corbyn's done. Sanders is too old now. I think this is what's so frustrating. See, Sanders is portrayed as this radical, archly leftist sort of thing. He's centre left. Nothing he's suggesting or advocating for is particularly radical. If you consider it globally, it's just Americans have this really skewed idea of what is radical and different and dangerous and whatever else. I think the political system in both countries and the media system, the media climate, is just so difficult to overcome for anyone who would advocate for those sorts of positions, however reasonable they might be. I think it's just too steep a hill to overcome. I think we need electoral change both sides of the Atlantic before we're going to see any real political change. I mean, Keir Starmer taking over the Labour Party, I think that's a good thing overall, but he's a return to the norm, and it's a norm that leaves people profoundly dissatisfied with the way things are going. Similarly, Biden in the States, he's a return to the norm, but it's the norm that people got fed up with, and that's why they went for Trump in part. So it doesn't solve anything. So America's had Obama, who promised hope and change and then turned out to be a moderate centre-right politician who didn't really do anything. Then Trump comes along and offers his version of change, which is a sort of nationalistic nostalgia, a vision of the US that was never true in the first place, and then fails to deliver as well. Yeah, people have been boned by both sides. But there's so much inertia in the political systems that much as I think gradualism and slow shifting change is the better way to go, I don't see how it's possible under the current systems. People may need to self-organise and step aside from the mainstream society, which sounds awfully hippie-ish and commune-y or even culty, but I don't see a way to overcome the inertia. And violent revolution isn't a good way to do it. So
Yeah, the US has had Thatcherite neoliberalism since Reagan, Clinton and Obama. We read just a friendly face on those economics.
yeah, you're still getting fucked in the ass, but at least they have the decency to give you a reach around. But yeah, it's not enough. that. Some kind of turtle bug. Looks kind of like a sushi roll.
How has your mood been of late?
All over the place. Lockdown hasn't bothered me that much, because I'm used to just, spending time with myself. Brexit's bothering me more, and lockdown's bothering me more since I know that there's a vaccine on the way, whereas it wasn't bothering me before. It's like, even though I still won't go out very much or anything, it's like, come on. If only so other people will stop complaining about living my normal lifestyle. But yeah, more anxiety than depression, I think. And this sensation of being trapped.
People are going to freak out about the vaccine.
Yeah. And refuse to take it, which is fucking stupid. Some people are proposing that what we should do is tie a stimulus check to being vaccinated as a way to try and encourage people to take it. So, take the vaccine and you'll get $1,000 or whatever it is, stimulus, but if you don't take it, you don't get the stimulus. Hentai tentacles. I can understand people losing faith in politicians, but science, not so much. But then there's that postmodernism.
That makes sense. I wonder if they'll try that.
Probably not. I don't think it would be received that well, but it's interesting that they're trying to innovate and find ways around the problem. But it's another one of these instances where people have stopped making the argument. They just want to censor anti-vaxxers rather than argue back against them. I mean, it is a thankless task, constantly debunking bullshit, but you gotta keep doing it. Because the crazy people never run out of steam.
I wonder how can and will react to the vaccine.
There was a news story today, I can't remember where, about how anti-vaxxers and QAnon are sort of teaming up. So, hooray. I guess it concentrates the stupid in one place. He said, desperately clinging for a bright side to the whole thing.
LOL.
No, it's the whole Brexit thing that's getting me down the most, because I know people whose lives have been turned upside down by the whole thing.
Do you run across many canon cultists?
No, anti-vaxxers a lot more often, but I haven't actually run into any honest-to-goodness QAnon cultists. They seem to be quite sort of insular in their own little world, which is probably why they're so extreme.
Yeah, they don't get out much.
The whole thing's a hoax started on 4chan, like so many other things are these days.
It seemed to evolve out of Pizzagate.
Yeah, to an extent. It's aspects of it are similar to the Satanic Panic. People seem really... something about threats to kids, no matter how spurious, seems to short-circuit people's brains. I'm worried that paedophile as an accusation is gonna lose all its power the same way racist or sexist has, which is unlikely to be, you know, good news for anyone who actually is a victim.
The more people disbelieve, the more they feel like they have to believe.
Yeah, and it becomes all-consuming, and it feeds your ego to think that you know something that other people don't.
Thermal protection fully.
I think a lot of people feel helpless in life, and that's something I can sympathise with, certainly. So they invent these narratives rather than tackling the world as it actually is. You know, grandiose conspiracies and centering yourself in some sort of, you know, big meaningful story appeals to people. I don't think you need to go insane to find those things, but people seem to prefer going insane.
That is at the root of all political issues, people telling themselves stories.
Just need to tell themselves better stories, or more realistic stories at least. That's what I used to like about the left. You used to be able to say, you know, reality has a left-wing bias, and it used to be true. Now this movement, whatever it is, calling itself
They
left-wing
sure
is
channeled that
divorced from
energy into
reality.
RPG campaigns.
Yeah. Conspiracy theories are always good fodder for that. What's your favourite conspiracy theory?
Reptilians.
Oh, but which version? And I think we can blame V for that. Might be before your time, I don't know how old you are.
Davidic is a trip.
Ugh, why anyone takes that man seriously is beyond me. He used to think he was the reincarnation of Jesus and that turquoise was a magical colour. My favourite conspiracy theory is that Stephen King killed John Lennon.
LOL.
It's a real conspiracy theory, and the entire basis of it seems to be that Stephen King looks a bit like the guy who shot Lennon. And that's literally it. That's the entire basis for it. And I guess because he's a horror author, maybe he's more likely to do horrible things in some people's minds. Lots of people seem to have issues with understanding the concept of fiction.
Davidic's books are a campaign setting in themselves.
I tried reading his website and it's just so poorly laid out. It's like a Geocities site from the 90s. Classic signs of schizophrenia and other mental issues. This was a while ago, he may have a better publicist or web designer now.
In your Gore video you talked about how it is influenced by ancient aliens.
Yeah, some of the ideas of people like Velikovsky, God, I can't remember the other guy's name right now. But yeah, all the idea that aliens visited ancient Earth and were influential over it was basically the role of the Priest Kings and the Kerr.
I think a guess world could be tapped for similar fantasy gold.
More than likely. I did write 2 RPG source books full of conspiracies for use in modern sort of espionage, investigation and conspiracy games, so I about broke my brain doing it though.
So much of it in the reptilian theory is just recycled theosophy.
Yeah. God, I hate theosophy, particularly because it was such a big influence on the new mage and the new World of Darkness, which was such a pale, shabby imitation of Old Mage, which is probably my favourite game from the old World of Darkness. I mean, why theosophy? Ugh. Lacked the elegance of the philosophical approach.
How did philosophy influence New Age?
That was basically the entire basis of it. Edgar Cayce, or is it Casey, his view of Atlantis and so on. And that was basically the derivation of the whole thing. Completely ruined it, in my not so humble opinion.
What made Old Mage better? It seemed to be based on Knights of the Golden Dawn and Crowley, but I don't know too much about it.
Not so much other than the will working idea. It was more of a philosophical approach, weirdly postmodern actually, in that mages were individuals whose personal beliefs about reality could shape reality. And it really kind of worked as a sort of a universal field theory for the entire World of Darkness. You could explain everything in mage terms.
It seems like New World of Darkness is really allergic to the Christianity in OWD.
Yeah, it was. Fortunately, they've gone back to the old World of Darkness now. Which isn't to say there aren't still problems, but...
I love Pentax Corporation and the Fomori, that is my favorite part of that world.
Yeah, those are cool.
Item received.
I can get an Atlas Pass version 2 now.
Product constructed.
One planet I haven't visited yet.
Hostile scan detected. Warning. Threat detected. Hostile ships approaching. Hostile ships defeated.
I appreciate you answering my question. It has been fun chatting. I've been watching your vids for over a year.
Well, do me a favor and recommend me to other people.
LOL will do.
It's so difficult to grow a channel these days.
Units received. Units received.
Are you on Instagram?
I am as... see if I can remember. As Grimstream. Grim-Achu.
Grim2.
Like Pikachu, but Grim-Achu.
Units received.
It's mostly pictures of kittens at the moment.
Grimaku.
Units received. Units received.
Would you ever want to do a Livestream discussion with me? I'd really like to chat with you some more about gaming and politics.
Sure, could do that sometime. Gotta be in the right headspace for it, but yeah, we can figure something out.
Awesome, I'll add you on Instagram, that's where I am the most active.
Cool. Visual learner, eh?
Indeed. I am gonna log off, but it was great chatting. I'll recommend your channel to my friends. I hope I catch another one of these streams soon. Take.
Cool, take care. I'm gonna log off in a sec anyway, so it's all good. Talk later.
Talk later, Grim.